Welcome to the Moscow Urban Forum, the keynote track. My name is Ksenia Adjube. I'm director of Adjube Scott Whitby Studio. And it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Patrik Schumacher, principal of Zaha Hadid Architects, who is going to speak about the politically smart city. It's a real honor to have Patrik with us today. He joined Zaha Hadid in 1988 and was seminal in developing Zaha Hadid Architects to become a 400-strong global architecture and design brand. Patrik studied philosophy, mathematics, and architecture in both Germany and in London. And he's an academician of the Berlin Academy of Arts. And he's been a partner of Zaha Hadid Architects since 2003 and a co-author on all projects. Patrik won the Royal Institute of British Architects Sterling Prize, the most prestigious prize in architecture, together with Zaha Hadid. And also in 1996, he founded the Design Research Laboratory at the Architectural Association in London, where he continues to teach. He also lectures widely and is recognized as one of the most prominent thinkers and leaders in the field of architecture and parametricism, urbanism and design, and he is widely recognized for his 2-volume book, The Autopieces of Architecture. So it's a real pleasure and honor to welcome you, Patrik. Hello, great to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Senia. That's very nice. I'm very happy to be here. It will be a fast pace in the hope that we have a few minutes at the end. So the politically smart city is my original title, but I think I'm also talking about the economically smart city, and that's connected, but I hope I will get also to the architecturally smart city at the end. So I'm looking at 3 themes: government, market, and architecture as contributing domains to create the good city, the good life. And also all of these domains obviously are guided by discourses, public discourses, academic discourses, and professional discourses. The built environment's contribution to society is ordering of social processes. This is very essential. As you know, all prosperity gains are generated through coordinating in a division of labor, and that is now expansive and global. But we need, in cities, we need to come together and have these processes interconnected. And so city is society. I mean, at least if you look at Hobbes, the Leviathan, the first theory of the state, the image of the social body, the social organism, the body politic, the detail is the physical manifestation and visual kind of manifestation of this is the city, where this social order of cooperation becomes manifest and transparent also, and legible, hopefully. Legibility becomes difficult in the level of complexity we are now facing with this kind of new level of urban concentration in recent years, which we also refer to as the urban renaissance. So what drives the contemporary urban concentration? And I believe it's that technology-based socioeconomic restructuring from Fordism to post-Fordism, based on the microelectronic revolution. The combination of telecommunication and computation leads to a totally new production paradigm, away from this mechanical mass production, which led to the modernist city of segregated zones and repetition within each zone. And and models like the Ville Radieuse was very prescient. It wasn't a mistake at the time. Moscow 1990, at that time, it was a mistake to continue. And the breakup of the Soviet Union and the dynamism and reintroduction of capitalism has something to do with that transformation from Fordism to post-Fordism. So in the Western world, this became clear in the 70s, where some of these Fordist satellite cities were in radical decline. And now I like this juxtaposition of a kind of Brasilia 1960 and Moscow City, let's say in the 2000s. That kind of transformation is very important. And London, the way it has evolved. I mean, that complexity, that chaos might be menacing, but it's also thrilling and to some extent functional. So Fordism to post-Fordism, we must be aware of decision makers in all domains of social life of this transformation. It's dynamic. And it means for society, but also for buildings and for the city, the shift from these kind of static, ordered, hierarchically ordered structures to a dynamic ecosystem with the dramatic increase in the dynamism and complexity of cooperation requiring a new level of communicative intensity, inter-awareness, inter-connection, and the city now becomes this knowledge economy super brain, where we're focusing not on manufacturing and physical work, but on R&D, finance, marketing, so that we know how to reprogram the robotic factories and which kind of updating of software services should be developed. So there's an enormous amount of creativity and innovation that this new technological production systems can absorb, which nearly means, and that couldn't have been absorbed in the 20th century. Nearly everybody can become a creative knowledge worker. And on the building level, and I'm sitting in the virtual rendering of our Sberbank Technology Center, banks become technology companies as well. We can see that fluidity, that these deep vistas, this integration across level, inter-awareness, inter-visibility, Adrian bridges as a theme for the architecture of the 21st century. And the difficulty here is to maintain legibility in the face of this complexity and dynamism, and have a kind of ordered field of empowering users to find each other. So we also have another building here in Moscow where this is on a smaller scale through a fantastic atrium realized in Moscow. So, but this also operates on the global scale, this kind of network society. So the raison d'etre, therefore, of large-scale urban agglomeration, and we discussed this morning, large scale is really important. These are these network effects, and there's going to be only few centers which will draw everything into their ambit. And medium-sized cities have less of a role. So these are basically these co-location synergies for consumers, of course, but more importantly for business-to-business collaboration networks. Integrated labor markets, deep liquid career development potentials, labor mobility, and economies of scope on all levels. These myriad of niche markets, these long tails for consumers, for business services, that's important. And as we integrate in the World Division of Labor, we have much more scope for specializations in these niches. And Adam Smith already knew how the division of labor depends on the scale of the market. So central urban planning faces an insurmountable complexity barrier with respect to the knowledge problem, in terms of structuring these networks. So that's why there is a challenge to the kind of 20th century planning regimes can no longer continue, and they actually have terminated. So I'm looking at these three, let's say, contributing domains. Government providing primarily legal order, perhaps a little bit more, and we'll come to that. The market actually should take over the land use order, the programmatic rationality of these integrate connections programmatically, and then architecture gives the aesthetic order, which is not only the look and feel, it's actually legibility, orienting, empowering, making transparent, and therefore facilitating the interaction. And these three contributing domains, they together synthesize the good city, and that means the good life, the prosperous life. So I'm going through those three. Government first, rule of law, yes, property rights need to be clearly defined. Infrastructure, yes, very important that because private initiatives, yes, are possible, but they face a transaction cost barrier, and there's maybe also speediness. Defend development, stand firm against all NIMBYism. That's the big risk in a kind of politicized planning process. And then planning itself, I want to call it more forward guidance. Planning is orienting and catalyzing the market-based self-organization. And that's a very kind of subtle game. Now, I think we really have to question how much planning then, and of what kind, would be optimal for prosperity in the future. So, and I think that, of course, this has to be always remain flexible and open, and we have to aim for generating these positive externalities, these spillover effects or synergies, and of course minimize negative externalities, which are also always at play in an urban kind of agglomeration. And my policy recommendation is in a way to stand back and say, hey, we should maybe simultaneously experiment with several regimes, planning regimes, in different districts. And I will come to make a typology of these, and then kind of see where you get buy-in, and also where the results are sustainable and progressive, and then kind of expand those and reseed the others. So I've made this proposal. So you have on the one hand more traditionally the sponsored orders, which could be either an anticipated order like a master plan, or curated just through a review, but without much of a plan, a one-by-one project review, or rule-based, where you have a lot of covenances. That's one way, and I think it should be far less imposing than previously if it goes down the route. But I think there should also be self-governed order, where land user and land owner associations will set those rules and curate in some kind of not a democracy of residents, but a democracy of developers and landowners who are the expert and in a sense representing and would represent well the final analysis end user value. And the last one, really a laissez-faire spontaneous order. Let that maybe on certain zones and certain districts to try that as well, because there you have a real discovery process potentially, which you can then learn from when you do your next round of curation. So first one is the more traditional top-down, second one I call meso-level, and then the third one is truly bottom-up. And there should be spaces where this can happen. And so central planning, second one I call private planning, and the third one is no planning, which I think should exist also somewhere. Now, that would be for mayor or for city parliament, the way they could kind of deal with this. But I think there's also, and that's now maybe a radical proposal, maybe that comparative experiment could be run as a competitive market system, taking full advantage of the profit and loss signaling. So my proposal is to privatize planning. Privatize the city's planning authority, for instance, via 50-year franchises, and go out in the market and get bidders, district by district, and then the planning gains would then be taken as corporate profit, for instance, via land value taxes on the district level, where they are mostly generated, and rather than having these random windfalls for people who from the planning process. So in this way, we would incentivize and reward an investment and a reinvestment in upgraded planning capacity and planning intelligence. It's a proposal I think that would work, because I do believe there is certain collective action and planning in the form of forward guidance that could be offered. But I think it needs to be exposed to the profit and loss signaling, so that the decision maker is actually feeling the material consequence of their decisions. And there is actually, so however radical this sounds, there's a historical example where exactly that happened. That's the great estates. That's the way London was developed in the 18th and 19th century, through these great private estates who would then curate a value proposition through covenants, through a leasehold system, and that would be staying within a family business, these districts, for hundreds of years. Fascinating, and one of the best areas of London were generated like this, whether you have the Bedford Square estate, Bedford Square and Bloomsbury, or you have Grosvenor, the Grosvenor estate with Grosvenor Square, and the areas now of Mayfair, as well as the Cadogan estate with Chelsea and Belgravia, fantastic districts, and they have been evolving. Now the problem is that these states lost their planning powers, and that was taken over by a democratic government, which meant largely a freezing up of the development process. So they kind of very little that can kind of additionally be built up in terms of density and in terms of transformation. But there is one lucky accident of history which I want to point to. That's the City of London Corporation, the last enclave of a quasi-private planning, which is totally outside the usual municipal democracy setup. Actually, it's partly possibly because there's very few residents living here. It's maybe about 9,000 residents and million workers commuting in and working in various businesses. So it makes sense that actually the businesses have delegates, and about now 32,000 voting business delegates, and only 7,000 residential votes. So in that way, there's a kind of precisely that meso level of private businesses coordinating their overall synergy cluster and industry cluster. And actually it works. I mean, it looks menacing, it is super dense, super high value, and it is actually the beating heart of the financial industry. But it has also a lot of beautiful historical fragments. It's a real value proposition, I think, and this is amazing. And so that was government. Market, very briefly, I mean, yes, the market is just that telecommunication system through the price system. The bidding process is an irreplaceable information processing mechanism for allocating economic resources, and it includes land resources, construction resources. And it's the competitive market process is the discovery process, because through the profit and loss signaling, you get these innovations which catch on, and you filter out and weed out everything which doesn't work. In a political process, weeding out doesn't take place, really. So I believe that only the unrestrained competitive market process has the information processing capacity that can be agile and adaptive enough to continuously deliver land and real estate resources to their most productive and most desired uses, and to discover and realize the intricate co-location synergies that motivate the move to the city in the first place. You want to be connected up all the right kind of people, the right facilities, and a land use plan which was fixed 30 years ago will only be an obstacle in that, and that needs to be discovered through a market process. Now, the market process will then give you that legibility also of a kind of structured order, legibly differentiated value landscape, could be orienting instead of disorienting through monotony and randomness, which we find now oftentimes. So, and the market isn't working. So you can see here, for instance, the way land value, because of all these restrictions, the NIMBYism and planning restrictions, that in recent decades, when the urban renaissance was taking off, land values just exploded as a percentage of the overall, let's say, property value. And that can't be right. You can see how small that percentage was. And then we have also land values and these are permitted land values, of course, land parcels, an enormous increase in the percentage of GDP they absorb. And the structure is much less in inflationary in this case, and particularly in the residential, where you have all the NIMBYism kind of preventing. You have in the last 20 years an enormous opening up, whereas other the land below other structures is kind of flatlining, as was agricultural land is flatlining. But in reality, that means a strange distortion. Sometimes you have sites right next to each other, which should have the same value because they have the same locational potentiality. One is permitted with residential and another one with commercial, and the residential is 4 times as high. So it's an enormous restriction, and it really costs us so much. A massive loss of prosperity and massive contribution to wealth inequality, because what we have to pay just to be accommodated in a reasonably proximity to our work is just exploded in terms of the multiple of our annual income or the percentage of our income. I mean, in my company, we have now grown to 500 people. A lot of the junior staff pay literally 80% of their salary to the accommodation, and it's really a massive loss of prosperity, precisely where it hurts the most. So I say, for the sake of general prosperity and social justice, market must be allowed to function in real estate and urban development. Wow. So architecture, how does architecture interface in this? And I mean, the architect's task, to cut this short, is simply if we allow the market to generate the co-location synergies, the adjacency matrix, then the architect has to translate that and articulate that to facilitate that and make it transparent, make it legible. That's what I call the aesthetic order. For the sake of empowering interaction through intervisibility, inter-awareness, enhancing navigation, orientation, and also atmospheric characterization of the various milieus and offerings. We need to intuitively have it at our fingertips instead of being kind of menaced by urban chaos. And the creative challenge is precisely this: as complexity and dynamism increases, and diversity of offerings, how to maintain that sense of place and navigability. So we have to shift from the monotony. We've shifted from the monotony of the 1950s to the chaos of the 2000 plus, and those need to be rejected. We have that strange paradox that we are actually generating a homogenization through too much difference. So at the bottom you can see I call this kind of garbage to urbanization. Nobody seems to have planned it, although planners are all over it, but the planners actually restricting the programmatic order to emerge. And the architectural discipline isn't able to at the moment to deliver because it's fragmented into various styles, and in the building by building approach is not able to forge a kind of legible, coherent, and complex variegated order. And when I look at rivers and mountains are the only thing which give sense of order, place, and orientation in the city. Otherwise, it's a kind of massive spill. So the rivers are incredibly important. Sometimes there's a mountain. If you look at these kind of natural formations, rule-based orders instead of random agglomerations, nearly, you have this intricacy of minor and larger flows. You have a directionality. You have differentiation. I call it complex variegated order, and we tried in our architecture to generate that differentiation, but through gradients and correlations to make that well ordered. So these are kind of district level interventions, master plans we generated in Turkey, in Singapore, in Beijing, in Spain, etc. So, and then in the design research lab at the AA, we generated this kind of parametric urbanism research as well, feeding into this little capital pending master plan in Istanbul, etc. So you get a sense that, and also in Moscow, we tried in a smaller scale to generate global urban forms which are intricate, differentiated, but also have a legibility and form to it, rather than an amorphous, disorienting mass. And you could kind of follow the style line, and it means something instead of being a kind of white noise chaos. So again, in Moscow, the smart city master plan, where we generated a series of various different sub-districts, and we're building up density. There's porosity of blocks, and the pedestrianization, and building up these layers also with bridges and atria, and having a unity across difference, and having an orienting thing. So we have that in various technology complexes, not whole cities, but larger multi-building complexes. We're doing a lot of those in China, where they're doing a lot of these kind of incubator hubs, these technology districts. And here's one which is called Unicorn Island rather. And we're developing all the buildings, and of course it's a big challenge, many designers, many ideas, to have unity and difference. There's residences, there's various public incubator buildings, there's corporate privates, there's exhibition buildings, and build up strong density in a campus feeling with a lot of green intersection starting to be on site already. So that's where we're going with that. But I'll come to that isn't the model either, because this is maybe you can do a fragment single hand. We need to have multiple authors integrating. When I call it a multi-species ecology, where the discipline, if it follows the paradigm of parametricism, it must be, because everything else is still kind of retro styles from yesteryear. Then, and it has all the potentials of differentiation and correlation, affiliation within it, and stitching up that organic order with a lot of variation, difference, and contingency absorption. So that's the model. The model is a multi-species ecology, where you would have a multi-author urbanism, but each author would have a differentiation and affiliation and resonance responsibilities, where we would critique each other. We need to have not only markets, we need to have discourses, and the field will be guided and self-guided by discourse, and then the test is in the market finally. So we have these projects at DRL, they have multiple, up to 15, 16 different architects designing fragments, pieces. If you go into detail, they're very different, but they also connect up, and there's a unity of paradigm, a unity of language to some extent, and methodology. So to overcome this, and finally I want to show you the new London we generate in this fashion with the parametric methodologies to have these differentiations, lawful, rule-based, and generate something which has, layeredness, density, articulation, and in different sites connecting up. And I'll just walk you through that. That's the vision. And at the moment, I don't know where we could do that, but it also needs the discipline to come together. And we can put a Zaha Hadid building next to a Chipperfield building, next to a Leon Krier building. Then we could never reach that. So this is where the vision of New London, actually between the city of London, and Canary Wharf, that will be another extension of service sector, finance, and technology and fintech clusters, building up a high-density world. You can see here with the topic of, a lot of the exoskeleton, freeing up the core to have voids and vistas across line spaces, bridges connecting up. And you can see here that, and this is just done with students with a clear thesis and a methodology going in and generating these fabulous towers. in different materialities: concrete, steel, timber, different forms of structure. And so there is a lot of variation, but there also is a lot of unity and synthesis and integration to get the sense of order and organic, like a jungle, which looks different from a garbage. So some of these kind of open spaces, once you have the circulation running in the columns on the outside. So I'll leave you with these impressions, and maybe we can have a few minutes of interaction, debate while this is running. That's the last image right there.
Beautiful,
so it is
Patrik.
An intensified city of London, but without this menacing kind of collage chaos.
Really beautiful projects. Thank you for taking us into the future. Thank you for showing us the future for a moment there. And yeah, we have a few minutes. So I found your talk fascinating, especially in relation to the context of Moscow, because I think Moscow is already very digitalized. The population is, and the governance systems are very digitalized, and this offers up opportunities to perhaps speed up development in that sense, the innovation in planning and governance systems. And your proposals are really fascinating. The ones that most jump out at me are the self-governance options and the spontaneous options, but also you just propose that we experiment with planning policy, which strikes me we can do based on the technologies that we already have at our fingertips, that the Moscow city government has at its fingertips, more or less integrated. And I wonder if we would put this into practice and if we would visualize it for the population. Do you think we can create parametricized urban governance models in which citizens can participate in, so that they generate the data, the users generate data which is pushed to these kind of models? They can be visual, they can be just pure data, which are basically feedback loops for governments to make those decisions, or perhaps they're automated and those citizens make their own decisions about the future of the built environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's actually interesting. There's another unit at the AA where my colleague from the office experimenting in forms of participation, and we're using virtual reality models to interact, as well as modularized configurators to have a participatory engagement in building up end users or corporate users, and interacting with the developer in this case, and having this participatory, rather than having a fixed plan to sell, but having a matrix of options to choose from. So you have some kind of market, a discursive process feeding into the result in a participatory way. Now, what I think is important to remember, that I don't think that this participation should just be a kind of voting, non-committal, which is too casual. I mean, I think one needs to have certain thresholds, and maybe voting with an investment, with a down payment. I'm looking a lot recently at let's say the blockchain and the whole cryptocurrency and blockchain world, smart contracts, and the way there a lot of participatory possibilities are.
Or it can be built. It can be built into the tax system. In fact, so the smart tax system can somehow integrate into this, so that people understand that they're putting down, cash, and there's going to be a responsibility. And also, of course, you mentioned multi-species ecology and an organic order. So I think we can also potentially integrate multi-species or the protection of vulnerable members of society into this process.
Absolutely, and I think that's very important. So when I'm talking about the organizations who would participate in the self-organization process or would take on certain districts, it's not only corporates, it could be NGOs, charities, will be active players, everybody with a particular mandate and resources and an expertise. So I think that's important, that we don't have that the decision makers are invested in rather than having a kind of general casual, in a sense, voting. I mean, what I find problematic in the current municipal democracies around the world, in particular faced in London, is first of all, the participation is very low. Turnout is very low. You still have a complex bundle of decisions, and there's a lot of, it leads usually to rejection, so to blockage. This NIMBYism idea that you rather prevent. And the councillors and local politicians are also in that mood that the prevention is always the safest bet in this atmosphere. I think what I believe in is a democracy, it's a bit like a shareholder democracy where you have invested, and there is, the larger the investment, the more would be the commitment and also the feedback of your decision onto your own kind of resources. That's very important. And this will serve the end users best. I do believe there needs to be coordination and negotiation and democracy, but it would be the democracies of those who've invested, who have resources to properly remain and be informed, have the expertise. I think that's probably most efficient in the end for the general population, for all of us as users, end users, and consumers and dwellers in the city. And because the current system is, we have to critically engage it. We can't have a universal franchise for everything as being the default condition, which supposedly delivers everywhere the best outcome. I don't find that. We need to be allowed to critique this. And so there's a new forms of democracy which I'm very interested in, and you're quite right, there's a new facilitation potentials with all the digitalization which we're seeing.
This has been
form of liquid
democracy
of the invested.
Yes. Patrik, it's been a fascinating talk and conversation with you. Thank you so much. We've run out of time, unfortunately, although this could go on for a while. So it's been a pleasure and honor to have you, and come to Moscow soon.
I will.
Thank you. Goodbye. And thanks for listening to our audience. Join us at the next session.